And today we have with us Barbara Bruno. Barbara is right now a postdoc at EPFL in Switzerland, where she works with Professor Pierre-D at the Chile lab. She received a master's and a PhD in robotics from the University of Genoa, and she has a huge experience in robotics. She's part of the NCCR Robotics organization and also currently involved in the ANIMATAS project, an European project. Previously, Barbara was a technical manager of the European project Caresses, I think I'm saying it right, focused on assistive robots with cultural competence. Barbara has a vast publication record and published more than 40 articles in international journals and peer-reviewed international conferences. She's very interested in human-robot interaction and cooperation, and of course, culture, which is what we're going to hear today about. So welcome, Barbara, and I'm just going to give you the stage.
Thank you. So now I share my screen. Can you see the screen? Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Perfect. So thank you, Patricia, for your introduction, and thank you for bringing up culture-aware robotics, which is, it's one of those richer fields in which things can go very, very wrong and quite splendidly wrong. So the first thing that we should ask ourselves when entering it is why? Why should we enter this field? The reasons not to do so are actually pretty straightforward. Mankind has an awful record at taking good inventions and using them for the worst possible purposes. So it's unfortunately quite easy to imagine how a culture-aware robot could be turned into a racist robot that is used to discriminate others. However, we are probably all familiar with face recognition algorithms that have better performances with light-skinned people than dark-skinned ones. Now, the designers of those algorithms surely had no intention of designing bias algorithms, but exactly because they neglected skin color into their work, they ended up designing a bias algorithm. So one argument for culture-aware robotics could be that to explicitly take culture into account might be our best, maybe our only chance at designing robots that are perceived by all people equally, treat all people equally, and most importantly, benefit all people equally. Now, were these noble, high intentions the reasons why I entered the field of culture-aware robotics? Not at all. I had just finished my PhD in robotics for elderly care. I was very happy, and I was only caring about robots for elderly care. And I thought that culture was not my problem. But then one day, unfortunately, I found this book. And in short, what it says is that culture has an impact on the effectiveness of medical treatment. For example, because a patient doesn't trust a doctor of a different culture and therefore doesn't reveal relevant information. Or for example, because a doctor that is unaware of the diet of a patient of a different culture just forgets to mention that a specific food might be the cause for an illness or might be interfering with the treatment. And so that is how culture awareness became my problem. We wrote a proposal for an EU project on culture-aware robots for the assistance of elderly people, the caresses that Patricia mentioned. And so what I will share with you today is actually what I did with a small research grant that I got basically between writing that proposal and getting the project to start, and then what we did during that bigger EU project. So the first thing that I did in culture awareness was to look for a model of culture. And this is what I found. The cultural iceberg model is probably the best known model of culture, and it's inspired by the theories of a famous anthropologist, which is Edward Hall. Basically, it defines culture through what culture influences, and it had the merit of highlighting how much the visible components of culture are actually just the tip of the iceberg. So going from the bottom to the top, culture influences our core values. So for example, what we deem to be good and what we deem to be bad. And as an example, in Italy, to respect the elderly is something that is considered good. Then culture influences the way we feel these core values should be reflected in our daily life. And for example, in Italy, one way to show respect for the elderly is to ensure that they have a seat on public transports, probably but even by offering our own in case all of them are full. And lastly, culture influences our visible behavior, so our actions and our words. So the way I would enact my respect for the elderly in a public transport situation is probably by standing up. And since Italian is a sign language, just do something like this and the person would understand. Now, this is all very nice, but pretty far from what I was looking for. So I kept looking, and what I found is that another anthropologist, Geert Hofstede, in a quite peculiar way that included doing a worldwide survey on employee satisfaction for IBM, discovered that differences between nations can be quantified on 6 axes that he called the dimensions of culture, and that he defined on arbitrary scales from 0 to 100. Now, I skip the details, but just to give you an idea, the individualism dimension, for example, represents the extent to which we view ourselves as independent being, as opposed to viewing ourselves as member of larger whole. And what you see here are the individualism scores of a number of countries in the world. Now, this thing looked very promising. This was the cultural model I was looking for, especially when I discovered that a number of behavioral parameters depend and actually have been related to these dimensions. So this takes us to what is probably the best studied problem in culture-aware robotics. Imagine a mobile social robot that is having to approach a person to engage in a brief conversation in an airport or in a museum. So what distance should it keep from the person to talk? So this is a problem of proxemics. And another thing that we owe to Edward Hall is the discovery that proxemics also depends on culture. And so for different people, this conversational distance has different values, and they range from less than half a meter to more than 1 meter. Another thing that we know from literature is that this distance is actually directly related to the individualism score. So the problem of cultural awareness in this sense is quite simple, is to find the mapping between a person's nationality through the individualism score to an appropriate conversational distance. Now, that would be simple, but the problem is that we hardly have a single cultural variable affecting a behavior. Sometimes gender plays a role, sometimes age as well, and these variables have significant differences in their nature. Age is a quantitative variable. Arithmetic operations make sense with age. But those dimensions of Hofstede, for example, they are ordinary variables. They're only meaningful in their ranking. And gender is a nominal variable. It doesn't even have a ranking between its values. So little by little, we have taken the big fuzzy problem of cultural awareness, and we have decomposed it into 2 very specific things. The first problem is to find a common representation for all those different variables that have an impact that relate to culture. And then once we have this common ground, to encode in this way the relationship that links all these cultural variables to our output parameters of interest. And the solutions that I found for these 2 problems are linguistic variables and fuzzy controllers. Now, I like them, so I will not even ask if there is anyone that doesn't know them. I will just go on and explain them again, but I will be brief, I promise. So to quickly explain what a linguistic variable is, we can take age. Now, age is typically counted in years, but at the same time, we use terms like adolescence or adulthood to denote portions of that domain. So if we take the original domain of the variable, the linguistic values like adolescence, and the mapping between each of these linguistic values and the original domain, these things all together are a linguistic variable. And the beautiful thing about linguistic variables that is useful in our case is that any variable, quantitative ones, ordinal ones, nominal ones, can be transformed into a linguistic variables. And at that level, they can be combined together. So this solves the first problem that I mentioned. Now, the second problem is fuzzy controllers. It's solved by fuzzy controllers, and they are standard controllers. So they set the value of an output based on an input value and a known mapping between the two. The only difference of a fuzzy controller with respect to a standard one is that they operate on linguistic variables rather than normal ones. So finally, coming back to our case, the input in our case is the individualism score that corresponds to a person's nationality, for example. This is fuzzified on the basis of the linguistic representation of individualism. Then the input-output mapping is expressed in linguistic terms. And for example, here it's if individualism is low, then the conversational distance is near. And this is also quite interesting for us because this qualitative representation is typically what we find from the works of anthropologists and sociologists and psychologists. And then this induces a linguistic value for the output variable, which is then defuzzified and converted into a value in the original domain. So for example, meters for the conversational distance. So exactly this controller that I've just described, for example, if we use the individualism scores given by Hofstede that we can download from his website, we get a conversational distance of 1 meter for Germans and one of 70 centimeters for people coming from an Arab country. And so now if I look at this method, you know, it's quite simple, it's quite elegant, it can be easily extended to multiple inputs and multiple outputs. So I was quite proud of myself. But the problem is that it has quite significant downsides. First of all, as you probably suspected when you saw the label Arab countries, the data about national cultures suffer from the same imbalances of training sets for face recognition algorithms. And so we have a lot more information about some countries and some cultures than about others. Moreover, that relationship between cultural variables and behavioral parameters that we need to know in linguistic terms, yes, but quite precisely, it's often incomplete. And this makes our system basically unverifiable. So in short, at this stage, I pay the price of all the simplifications I did along the line. And I have a method for cultural awareness, which is, it's nice and elegant and pretty unusable beyond a few simple cases. Especially, this is unusable to grasp non-quantifiable human traits like our preferences, our habits, which are fundamental if we want to personalize our robots for companionship of elderly people. That was the goal I started with. And lastly, this approach is also a deeper issue. It relies on cultural information at the national level, for example, the individualism score, and applies it at the level of people. This is probably the definition of a stereotype. We are assuming that all Germans are exactly the same. And while this might be okay for some simple parameters and for some short interactions, it is absolutely unacceptable if we want to apply it to deeper concepts and for longer and more meaningful interactions. So this was the situation when the Caresses project started. The project was a consortium of European and Japanese partners. It was funded by the Horizon 2020 framework. It ended some months ago, actually, and the aim was to design a culturally competent robot for cognitive assistance and companionship of elderly people that live in retirement homes. So concretely, we wanted to do a bit better than what I did with culture-aware robotics, go beyond those limitations that I listed. And specifically in our experiment, we wanted to check, first of all, whether people could tell that we had tried to design a culturally competent robot. What impact did our culturally competent robot have on their perception of robots and robotics? And most importantly, what impact our robot had on their mental health? Because that was, why we started. Like, it's probably better. So if you remember the cover of that book that started this whole journey, well, we contacted the author when drafting the proposal for this project. It's Irena Papadopoulos, and she became a partner in Caresses. And the contribution of her work package, and actually the first half of the project, was actually drafting a monumental manual that basically starting from best practices for culturally competent nursing, so human cultural competence, her own experience, the experience of our Japanese partners, interviews with care professionals. They all drafted from this some guidelines for a culturally competent robot. And at the University of Genoa, where I was at the time, our task was to basically find a representation of those guidelines that could be used by a robot. And this time we decided to forget all the approaches we tried before and go for ontologies. So what is an ontology? This is the last explanation of the day. If you are familiar with computer science and the concepts of classes and objects, it's basically that. So an ontology is a way of representing knowledge that relies on two distinct parts, basically. The first one is called the terminological box, or T-box, and it includes concepts, their properties, and the relations that link one concept to another. And the other part is called the assertional box, or A-box, and it contains the instances. So it's quite funny that the standard example to learn ontologies and learn how to operate on them is the pizza ontology. And from a cultural perspective, and judging from the toppings combinations that they allow, I can tell you it was definitely not prepared by an Italian. But so how can an ontology be used to represent cultural information? First of all, in the T-box, we put all of the concepts from all of the cultures that we can. We try to create a representation of everything that one can find on Earth. As an example, this is taken from the portion that concerns breakfast habits. We have the concept of having breakfast, and then we link it to all the possible foods and beverages that one can have from for breakfast, regardless of the culture they relate to. Then in the A box, so the part of the ontology that contains the instances, that is where we describe national cultures. And the way we do that is each culture is basically represented as a set of instances. Each culture has one instance per each of all the concepts that are in the T box. And the way the instances of one culture differ from the instances of another is through the way the properties are filled. So without going into the details for the moment, I will just say that which properties we should give to this concept and how to fill them is something that we also extracted from the guidelines. I will just now here ask you to look at the last column, because that is the property likeliness, and it's the most important one. And this sort of roughly represents how likely it is for that concept to hold true for a person of culture. So going back to the case of our breakfast habits, for example, the English instances of concepts cheese and ham have a high likeliness because these are typical for the breakfast selections for English people, while natto has a very low likeliness. Likeliness is that small red letter which is on top of the boxes. Now, conversely, for example, the Japanese instance of natto, so that instance for the Japanese culture will have a higher likeliness and higher than those of cheese and ham. Now, let's take a break. With ontologies, we have solved, let's say, the problem of having a rich representation of cultural information. And this is because ontologies are very powerful knowledge representation means that allow us to represent a lot of information. But we still have to solve the problem of moving from national cultures to the sort of unique melting pot that each of us is. And moreover, if we go back with our minds at the first approach that I presented, there is actually a big assumption in there that I left unmentioned. And that is the fact that we were assuming that what is known to be valid for human-human interactions also holds true for human-robot interactions. Now, luckily, you are human-robot interaction experts, maybe more than me, likely. And we know that there is a lot of evidence that's actually supporting that. And it's suggesting that basically humans treat humanoid robots as one of us, sort of, because of a lack of a better alternative. But most importantly, humans, although they treat robots like one of us, they know that robots are not one of us. And in Caresses, we actually relied on humans knowing that robots are alien creatures, foreigners, different from us, exactly to try to find an original solution to solve the problem of cultural personalization. So in a nutshell, this is the working principle of Caresses. If a robot knows that it's speaking with an Italian person like me, it will know some facts about Italy. It will rely on that likeliness to pick topics that things are true for me, but then it will ask whether those topics really hold true for me, and then we'll record this information. If it's true, that's perfect. We found a solution. If it's not true, okay, he will go pick a second most likely option and keep on asking until he finds what is really true for me. And the important thing is that, in a sense, we can say that this behavior can resemble the one of a curious, friendly tourist in a foreign country that goes around asking naive questions, maybe sometimes even drawing from stereotypes, but that person is usually forgiven when they go wrong. And this is because they ask, and this is because people know that they are foreigners and not locals, and therefore it's sort of okay for them to make a wrong guess from time to time. So this is what we relied on in Caresses, on the people being patient with robots. So how does that work concretely? We are in the A box, and on top of all those culture-specific sets, we put another set, the person-specific one, which is again composed of instances that relate to those concepts that we said, but unlike the culture-specific ones, it starts basically empty, only with the name of the user and the information of the nationality, which is something that we use to select, okay, the first type of likeliness, the first things to use to start the conversation. Then, on the basis of those T-box connections and those likeliness values for the initial associated culture, we instantiate a Bayesian network. And in that network, those likeliness values are converted and they are given a real probabilistic meaning. And the connections between the concepts become the expression of direct influences of the likeliness of one concept onto the likeliness of the others. And all concepts in the Bayesian network then are also directly influenced by the likeliness of the user of belonging to a specific culture. So at any point in time, basically what happens is that the robot looks at its own person-specific set. It browses the ontology to find a concept that it's suitable for the moment and for which it doesn't know yet the person stands, such as breakfast habits, maybe in the early morning. It checks the Bayesian network to identify which is the most likely option to start with, given what it currently knows about the user's culture. And then it uses one of those questions encoded in the instance in order to ask the user about it. The user replies, and this reply is used not only to create the person-specific instance about that concept, but also in the Bayesian network to propagate onto all the interconnected instances. So for example, let's take a fictional English lady, Dorothy Smith, which I've used for 3 years in all my examples. She's initially identified as an English because of her nationality. And so the robot in the early morning might ask her whether she likes to have ham for breakfast. If she says no, the ontology will not only record her answer, her preference on that topic, but also slightly decrease her closeness to the English culture, because that was proven to be not so perfect. At the same time, if the robot keeps on inquiring about her breakfast preferences and maybe discovers that she has natto for breakfast or she likes it, then the system will slightly increase her closeness to the Japanese culture, because that was right once. And so the Bayesian network will end up representing in different weights a unique combination of, let's say, Englishness and Japaniness and something else that is Dorothy. And this is what will be used to weight all the future options. So this is what the robot will use to make all of its future inquiries. Now, Miguel, it's your turn. I've said, I think, many, many words. I have no clue what time it is. So just to show how the robot is behaving in reality, I will show a small video. And by I mean someone else.
I can show it if you share the link.
I can also.
Yes, sorry.
No. Okay, go, Patricia.
So it's here.
Okay, I'm just sharing my screen now. Share sound. Okay.
I have to apologize for some of the wording because this is not exactly a scientific video, but it's the only one in which we can show real elderly people that interacted with robot, because these people gave their approval for it. And I wanted you to see Pepper and the caresses system in real action.
Which monument is in this photo?
It is the Westminster. Oh, wait a minute. Big Bang.
That's correct. Well done. Do you want me to play for you one of the highlight scenes of the movie The Lady Killers?
Yes, please.
Great. Let's do that. Tell me what kind of situations make you feel happy.
Lovely to be with Pepper. I'm very cheerful lady. I love children. I'm happy to surrounded by the children. I like lovely music. I don't like to be alone. Because I born in a very big family.
I know that many children were evacuated from British cities to the countryside during the Second World War. I was wondering, do you remember that time?
Yes.
Please, tell me what was the most difficult thing that you and your family had to go through during the Second World War?
Well, the most difficult thing was that we were a family of four, a husband and wife, and a little boy, me, and my younger sister. And my father, who was 29, was conscripted to go into the Royal Air Force. And then they posted him to Iraq in the Middle East. And we didn't see him for 3.5 years at least.
Do you ever pray or meditate?
Yes, I used to do every day. I pray and I meditate. Sometimes I visit churches.
I know that many Indian people meditate sitting on the floor in the quarter lotus position, usually on a small mat or carpet, with eyes closed and back straight.
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
あなたの人生についてもっと知るのは面白いです。面白くないですよ。質問してもいいですか?
Please, tell me more about your table, the one which you keep in your living room.
Yeah, it is, if you wish, I will tell you. It is very small table. I have 2 tables, actually 3 tables.
Please tell me the title of the song, the artist or the genre you would like to listen to.
Chuck Berry.
Where are you? ¿Dónde estás? ¿Dónde estás?
Chest, and then out to the side, and then up to the chest, and out to the sides.
I finished, and it's been lovely. I had some music that you may have heard. I had Chuck Berry, and then I had the Pearl Fishers, classical, absolutely beautiful.
I told to my children that I have the company of Pepper. Pepper is so adorable, and he is a very good companion to me.
So just a small clarification on the video. Those people, everyone participating in the experiments, they knew that they were being filmed through this camera. That was for safety purposes, because we had our research team in another room in the same building, and gave consent to their videos to be shown. So this is why the video is publicly available. But the whole conversation, the whole interaction was completely non-scripted. So the robot was following that weird likeliness mechanism. And this is how it ended up, discussing tables, which is not exactly a common conversational topic. So thank you, Patricia, for showing that. now I can quickly, because I see that time is flying, resume my presentation. So from an experimental point of view, caresses were quite simple. We took people from three different cultural groups. It was Japanese living in Japan, English people living in the UK, and Indian people living in the UK. And for each of these cultural groups, we divided them into three conditions. The first one was a culturally competent robot, then a culturally incompetent robot, and then care as usual, that is no robot at all. And they were, so the groups interacting with the robot, they were doing that over the course of 6 3-hour sessions over 2 weeks. Now, it turned out that designing a culturally incompetent robot is as difficult as designing a culturally competent one, because we don't know what cultural incompetence is. And so we spent hours debating what cultural incompetence is, and then we sort of nearly arbitrarily decided to represent it with these three things. Not knowing how one culture differs from another, that concretely we said as putting equal likeliness for all the options on anything, knowing less, so simply have fewer concepts, and then being incapable of inferring some cultural information based on a given fact, which is that basically that propagation mechanism in the Bayesian network that I discussed before. So coming to the findings, did we design a truly culturally competent robot? I honestly have no clue. It does something. Sometimes it looks very smart. Sometimes it looks very weird. And there were moments when it was bringing up, you know, World War II again with the English people, and we said, "Damn! I mean, just stop it." But that was it. From our analysis, from the quantitative metrics, there was no difference between the culturally competent robot and the culturally incompetent one. So maybe the EU is not super happy with us. But the positive side is that the two robots, both of them, they improved the user's perception of robotics and robots. So that's nice. I mean, no harm done. And then the real nice result is that when we measured their mental health through this SF36 tool, which is a standard tool for that, we saw that while the people in care as usual had a cognitive decline in the 2 weeks, in the span of the 2 weeks of the experiment, the two groups of people that were interacting with the two robots did not have that decline. And that was a statistically significant difference. So all in all, did I solve the problem of cultural aware robotics? I'm pretty sure I didn't. I have more questions than when I started at the beginning. But the goal at the beginning was to do something beneficial for people. And it looked that anyway, in some way, at least we did. Now, talking about those questions, as you maybe saw during the presentation, I also had a lot of questions for you. So if you don't have questions for me, you know, I can go on and asking and interviewing you. Thank you a lot for your time and attention. And I'd be happy to share the conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. This was really, really incredible work. I love the video. I love elderly people. So I'm very passionate when I can see them interacting with the robots. And now we open the debate for questions. We have a couple of minutes so we can engage in nice discussions. You can either just unmute yourself, raise your hand here, and we will call you, or just write your question on the chat. I see Kim, so go ahead, Kim.
Oops. Sorry about that. Hi, Barbara. I just want to say I really, really enjoyed your talk, from the technical approach all the way to this very heartwarming video. It was really refreshing to see the same robot interacting with very different people from different countries, different cultures. My question is more, I think, of social, I guess, question than it is a technological question. I'm wondering, with the specific population that you that you're working with, it seems like cultural is really defined by the nationality. And so you had, dimensions representing different nationalities, and you had weights on these. I'm wondering with the newer generation, if culture should be understood in different ways, looking, for example, at how people on social media, for example, are classified into these subcultures that seem to cross boundaries of nations. And so for thinking of me, for example, like in terms of, I don't know, the food that I'm cooking, like yesterday I cooked a Cuban dish that I tried when I was in Miami, and I have nothing to do with Cuba. I'm from the Middle East and I lived in Portugal. I cook Portuguese potatoes. So in a way, there is this idea that I may be closer to some cultures in terms of nations than others, but also I think that there might be a different way of understanding cultures in terms of, how online, like how preference learning works online, where if you're likely to like yoga, maybe you're also likely to like, I don't know, maybe to be a vegan, or I don't know, right? So it seems like there might be some potential in looking into social structures that are not defined by nations, but by something else. And I'm wondering what the something else is, and how you think maybe the elderly people of maybe in 100 years from now would have to be modeled differently.
So that's a great problem. And the quick question to that is that I have no clue. Like with everything I presented today, by the way. So one funny thing is that actually the notion of culture not being a one-to-one mapping with nationality is actually quite old. And fun fact, in our first submission of the proposal draft to the European Union, we said that we are going to have in our testing group, Indians from this specific, part of India that are living in the UK, and white English people. And the EU said, are you crazy? This is a racist robot, remove the color. But the problem is that this is actually a cultural term. I mean, it was not us inventing it, is that the white English cultural group is very different from the black English cultural group. And this is already old. I mean, this is still going back to those national levels. So yes, I'm super sure that nationalities are not the only thing that is defining society and defining cultures. And people nowadays, beside what you mentioned, so a lot of new things coming up, or new ways in which, so culture is this cycle, culture influences us, but at the same time we influence culture. And so there are new things that we are creating, which are influences the culture of tomorrow. And can our tools, model that? I don't know. I'm not even sure they can model national cultures and what we know today. But it's nice to keep on asking ourselves this problem, and it's nice to keep on thinking that, okay, if culture is also influenced by things which are beyond nationality, then our robots better be able to also grasp that, because otherwise we will be designing racist robots still, which are racist in different terms, maybe not on skin tones, but on something else.
Thank you very much.
We have some questions on the chat now. So Mario, I don't know if you want to ask the question yourself, or if I should read it.
Yeah, you can ask it yourself. It's okay.
Thank you. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and read. So Mario asks about the differentiation between the T box and the A box on the ontology. Is the T box fixed, or does it changes with the knowledge acquired during the interactions? Also, how do you know which instances to put in the A box and in the T box?
So the T box is fixed. Basically, the T box is the union of everything that is on Earth. Once a topic, once a concept exists, I mean, the T box is as fixed as Earth can be. So if a new dish is invented, then we should add it there. But the T box is meant to be stable. Then the way instances are put on the A box is basically regarding that differentiation. We have culture-specific instances that grasp what we know about a nationality, the common preferences, and possibly, and that's why I brought it up, possibly even some stereotypes about, okay, this is the most, no, Italians like pizza. This might not be true for all Italians, but this is something that we encode in there. And then we have the knowledge that we encode in the instances of the culture specific instances is the way in which the robot should approach that topic with people, for example, speaking English. So a way to ask about it, a way to make a positive statement about it. It's basically information about how to manage the conversation, the search and acquisition of information related to that topic. And then that likeliness concept, which is used to compute, when it's fused in the Bayesian network with the likeliness values of the other cultures that we realize the user might be linked to. This is what we use to update the likeliness value of the user. Did I answer the question? Bad feedback is good feedback, actually. So don't hesitate to tell me this was not clear, this was useless, this is outdated.
Oh yeah, thank you. It's clear. It's just the since you have like different layers of A-box, as I understand, like one for the culture, one for the personal. So I didn't understand well how to make this differentiation. Why not call a T-box the cultural layer, for instance, or the country layer?
No, because that's a good question. Why didn't we do that? I don't know. I would have to think about it. So it made let's say what we like is to have this T-box, so the concept, which are independent from culture, completely independent, and then assume that culture is something that we instantiate. Culture is something that comes on top. And then what was also nice in a sense is that this way you have that a human is exactly as, weighting as much as a national culture, because at the level of a person, this is exactly, the relation.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm just going to go ahead and read the next question by Wesley. So he wrote, thank you for the amazing presentation, Barbara. One question. As you mentioned something about going back to World War II again and again, I wonder what failure modes you were encountered during testing.
So let's say I was discussing actually when chit-chatting with the organizers before this talk, there are a number of technical failures that you can imagine. As soon as you take a robot, you out of the lab, you bring it in another environment, but these are typically related to actions. So we had problems when the robot moved, because the robot all the experiments were done in the room of a resident for privacy reasons. And the rooms in the retirement homes are quite small. So the robot was constantly detecting obstacles everywhere, and that was a problem. Another funny problem that we fixed for this video, but if you go on YouTube and look for older ones, at the beginning we didn't control the head. We let it move around. So sometimes the person was saying something, the robot was detecting something weird around and replying like this. And this was turning the elderly crazy for some reason. And they would start looking, okay, what is there? And that was a problem because it was upsetting the participants. And that's, that's the no-go. From a conversation point of view, the problems, it was hard to tell when there was a problem because of this mechanism, basically. We had, and maybe you saw it in the video, we had a basic sort of a keyword-based recognition system for the robot to understand yes and no and variants of that. And then we had the possibility to touch the tablet to confirm an operation. Now that was sometimes annoying. And so that was working quite okay. Sometimes the robot was interrupting a person talking. That is something that happened quite often. And maybe what could be other problems that we encountered. Yeah, I cannot, I will think more.
Just a follow-up, Taras has a follow-up on the failures, so I'm just going to let him weigh in.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, thank you so much for the talk, Barbara. I love how humble you are. It encourages us all to be humble.
Because I know my work.
Yes. We all know our work, but not everybody is as humble as you. So thank you for that. And my question is, I think that failures is quite an important question when we're talking about human-robot interaction, and especially when we talk about culture. And since it involves speech recognition, I imagine there could be also speech recognition errors leading to wrong profile of a person, and that would probably influence your experiment quite a lot. So I wonder if you kind of looked into that and if you've seen like how often it happens or how much it affects the results and such.
That's a very good point. And it reminds me that in one of the sort of pilot experiments that we did, thankfully, a quite dramatic, one of these failures happened. And that was that the person was talking, I think, about the wife and then about the daughter. And somehow the robot sort of mixed the two. And so assumed that this man had a live wife and name with the name of the wife, but assuming that she was alive, which she wasn't. And so then the robot at some point kept on asking, okay, how is she? Where is she? And that was upsetting for the person, for the man. So that was one of those cases in which, so when I mentioned the researchers being in another room in the place, we had technical researchers that were going there for technical failures, but then we also had psychologists and nursing people, and they were going there and intervening or telling us to stop the robot when they saw that the problem was not technical or technical, but actually distressing the patient. And so to avoid that, what we did was to ask the caregivers, when I said at the beginning that the conversation starts with some information that we know about the patient, we started asking for those family-related information to be put at the beginning, or even to ask whether some topics should not be addressed at all. Right. Now, concerning other problems, other mix-ups, they happened. But what is interesting is that people reacted to them very naturally, because they actually also happen in our daily life. We are very disfluent in our conversations. A person is talking about something, I bring in something completely different. And so, user said, okay, I just told you a dramatic story of my, World War II experience, but now you ask me about tea. Okay, might be tea time. Let's talk about that. And that happened.
Right. Yeah, cool. Thank you for your answer. That's clear now.
Thank you so much, everyone. We will have to close the Q&A session just because we are on time and I want to be mindful, but we have a Slack channel and I think the link is going to be pasted here. So please join the Slack. There will be a channel just for Barbara and you can communicate and connect with her there. And so let's just give a huge applause to Barbara. It was an amazing, amazing talk. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Patricia, for calling for it, actually. It's your merit.
Well, it was the organizers group that we thought Barbara is the right person to open up the 2021 year. So that was really, really a good way. And so I'm just gonna very quickly share with you that our next session, actually, it's gonna be right next week. So please join us to hear Danielle Rakita from the University of Wisconsin-Madison to talk about methods and applications for robot arm motions in real time. And with that, I thank you very much. Thank you for being here and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.